Gearren, Director of Vp Groundforce Training Services, offers some fascinating insights on excavation safety, explaining why the topic should be a high priority right now for all those involved in water industry construction projects, rather than waiting for a tragic accident or fatality to act as a belated call to action.
Okay, so Groundforce Training, you're celebrating your 10th anniversary, I believe, and so a good place to start would be if you can give us some idea, I suppose, of how you've seen excavation technology and the training side of it develop. You know, what changes have you seen over that period?
I'll say, Phil, probably the biggest change that I've seen is availability in the marketplace. So what I mean by that, historically, people have worked with a colleague essentially on the job to understand how to do excavation work. Maybe not been qualified to do it in terms of getting a recognized qualification. And one of the big reasons I believe for that was traditionally you went to Birch and Newton CITB, which is one location in the country, and it was traditionally a 4 or 5 day training course that you'd go on if you were really keen to get qualified in excavation training. Obviously, that's not very convenient for most people to go to that one location and to spend that amount of time trying to understand how to install, inspect, and remove shoring systems. So the big difference is when Groundforce Training coming in 10 years ago, we're the only hire supplier that have a proper excavation training arm. And what we've effectively done is try to remove all the barriers to entry, meaning there's at least 17 locations now around the country. We have lots of open courses where one person can join a course, or if someone wants a dedicated course, we would run a dedicated course. And we also have the option to deploy out to a site, bringing all the equipment out to site and delivering a course there with the client's excavator, with their ground, their classroom. Which sounds very, very simple, and most training courses happen like that all day long, classroom courses, but this is a bit more complex because of what's required to safely complete the training. So that's the big change over the last 10 years, in my personal opinion, is just if you do want to get qualified this day and age, it's very, very easy to do so, whereas in the past it was quite inconvenient to do so.
Yeah, and I'm wondering as well, in terms of virtual, we're talking obviously over Zoom today. I mean, have you been able to also offer sort of virtual online training to a certain extent? I appreciate obviously there's a practical element, so people do have to do things practically, but can you deliver at least some of the content virtually as well, as opposed to people having to attend classrooms or whatever?
Yeah, the vast majority of most courses that we deliver are 2 days for excavation training, although there are other options. The first day of the course is heavy on the theory, and the second day is heavy on the fully practical, really. So yes, through COVID, we were asked to do some virtual courses on the appreciation of excavation safety, which is absolutely fine. We've attempted to go back to face-to-face now because we've had lots of feedback that this complex subject, although you can go over on a Teams call or a Zoom call, there's lots of areas where we want to write on the whiteboard. We want to talk about different scenarios. And unfortunately, with Zoom and Teams calls, people can go on mute. They can turn off their camera. The interaction, it can be quite difficult. So it's possible, but it's not ideal in what is fundamentally a practical training course, essentially. I mean, there are some theory that comes into it, but most of the training that we deliver segues into a practical element and assessments.
No, that makes sense. And in terms of the current excavation and safety challenges, are there particular, I don't know whether any regulations, legislations come in and people have to address that, or obviously technology changes, techniques change. Just if you can give us a flavor of what you think the major challenges are at the moment when it comes to excavation safety.
Because the major challenge, really, Phil, is down to tier 1 contractors. That's the way the safety world operates in reality. A lot of people think the HSE mandate certain things. And the reality, HSE, Health and Safety Executive in this country, does not mandate anything. They say to companies, do what you deem to be reasonably practicable. So really, the safety training world revolves around what tier contractors mandate on particular sites or on their contracts. So if Scottish Water says, for example, we require everyone to have a safe digging course under EUSR, EU skills, which we deliver, then their contractors are going to go out and seek that course and become qualified to carry out safe digging. So that's really what it boils down to, Phil. Yeah.
And in terms of the impact that safety training can have in terms of preventing excavation related accidents and incidents, and also I suppose the way, bear in mind what you've described, how you've have to adapt to these challenges. So you, as you say, you can't, I guess you can offer some standard courses, but you potentially do need to tailor them for each client because they have potentially different bars or thresholds as to what they deem to be safety. So just if you can unpick that fairly complex landscape, if that's possible.
I guess in terms of different clients looking for different courses, what we try to do is give them something that's meaningful, meaning it's always, almost all the time, retains the accreditation. So we look at ensuring it's an industry standard course for CITB levy payers. We're an ATO, which is an approved training organization, so we can claim parts of the money back for them essentially through the ATO portal. So we want to retain that and then do the bespoke bits that they talk about. In reality, when we meet with clients, what we find is 99% of the time, what they call bespoke is already included in what we're delivering, but they might want some of their procedures, some of their speak involved in that course, which is not a problem, but we ask them to send over their documents so that we can understand what they're talking about specifically, say the right words on the course, get our trainers to understand that, and then we can sort of speak that back to them during the course. But all the principles of actually carrying out a safe excavation, they don't change throughout the course and the standards don't change. And then that way the client gets something they deem bespoke, but also as something accredited and industry recognized, because that's one of the issues that in the training industry, where if you're delivering lots and lots of different courses, and we say in-house courses and all these different things, when you go to those sites, they may or may not recognize that qualification. So the best case scenario is to give individuals and companies something that has a great chance to be recognized on the site. They can look it up online on the EU Skills website, for example, and type in the person's name, find that they're in date with their qualification, even if they don't have a certificate on them. So it's all transparent.
And in terms, I'm just curious, in terms of the attitude people bring to the training in this day and age, are most of them enthusiastic and well aware of why it's important and stuff, or do you still get what I call it a traditional, but or some people a bit reluctant, think, well, I've been doing this job for 20 years, I think I know what I'm doing, therefore why am I why have I been sent on this course? Do you still get that, or is it mainly people get the health and safety aspect now, so you get willing, enthusiastic participants, shall we say?
Yeah, I think we get a mixed bag. I mean, to pretend like we don't is disingenuous. We get people that have been told to show up on a course and they don't know why they're there. We get individuals that are really keen to get the qualification. They may have been doing it for years but have no recognized qualification. They're quite excited that they're going to actually go through the sequence and do it properly and be protected. So it is a mixed bag, but I think our challenge is, we are going to move on to a practical element most of the time, which most people are really excited about, that they're not just going to be death by PowerPoint on the course. There's a reason that we're talking about this. We're actually going to go outside for a full day and we're going to dig these excavations. We're going to follow a temporary works design, and we're going to inevitably, even people that have been doing it for 30 years, come off the course and have learned one or two things, which is ideal. because they can go back and implement that in the workplace, or even the equipment that's out there at the moment, the range of equipment, their procurement department. There might be a disconnect between what they do on site and what the procurement department sends them on site. So they can re-educate and say, look, we're getting these systems. There's actually a cheaper option out there that's easier to put into the ground. Could we have this instead? And I think that's something else that gets displayed on the course, and the individuals can feed that back to their companies.
Okay, and in terms of, we're talking excavation safety, so are we mainly talking operation of the machinery that, in crude terms, digs holes in the ground, or as I can see in the background, are we also talking, once you're digging or as you're digging, how to secure, proper safely shore up the hole? What range of courses are you offering?
Yeah, it's actually the complete opposite from a machine driver. When we talk about excavators, obviously that's the machine driver, and excavation is putting these systems in the ground. So I guess fortunately or unfortunately, how we look at it is probably only 20% of clients that hire out this equipment have ever had even one single person trained to install, inspect, and remove the systems. We still are in very much an infancy stage, even after 10 years, of individuals that fully believe that they're competent and they can do it themselves without any training whatsoever. However, it is probably the most dangerous job you can do on a construction site or utility site by far. If you think it working at height, machines are around, all those kind of things. So what we're trying to do is say, look, you've got this protection systems, whether it be sheet piling, boxes, even timber shoring being used these days. Is there a way that we could safely install, inspect, and remove these systems, and variety of different systems, understand how to do that, be qualified to do it, feel like you're competent to check it and read a basic design. So if Groundforce provides free designs, for example, whether that be an engineered design that might be 50 pages long, or you can go on and do your own design, actually online these days on the Groundforce website. But whatever it is, it's called Your Solution, by the way, if you wanted to go look that up. And whatever that design is, the important thing for us on the excavation side is, can you, as the individual, use that like an IKEA guide to put it in the ground safely? I think traditionally what would happen is people know what they're doing in their mind. The kit comes to site, they just stick it in the ground without maybe looking at the design always, because they think that's something for the office, that's not for me. But actually, that one page is for you. So let's make sure we have that. We install it just like an IKEA piece of furniture. And if there's bits left over, or something hasn't gone right, we want to do that and remove that perception that by doing that, it slows the process down, because actually it speeds it up and it's much safer.
And in terms of customer feedback success stories, are companies willing to admit, if you like, that before they engage with you, they had problems and you've helped them, or are they a little bit sort of nervous of admitting that, they weren't doing things like what I say? How easy is it for you to gauge how successful, when you do some training, do companies give you feedback that this is tremendous, we've improved productivity or safety, etc.? Just, and I guess, you might not be able to name names, but what sort you can tell us as to.
No, I think for me, at the start in the business, doing surveys with our customers that hire out the equipment and other clients that, traditionally maybe went on courses that were 4 or 5 days long, and, understanding their requirements. And like I said in the very beginning of this, what I discovered in reality was, yes, there's some people that were trained, but to pull someone off site for 4 or 5 days and go a very, very long distance to become qualified was just such a huge barrier to entry. So I think when we eventually broke that down and provided lots of options locally for clients, maybe maximum travel, 1.5 hours, something like that, it was more reasonable. We got it down to what today is a 2-day course. I think companies, recognize that, hey, we've got all these people doing these excavations. They're not trained, but at the same time, someone like us or providers have to give them options, because it's not realistic to spend, crazy amounts of money traveling, hotels, going on a 5-day course that could have been done in 2 days. It just wasn't practical. So I think, we get good feedback from the clients, and every now and again we do have room for improvement. But I think what we found and still find today is, when someone challenges us, for example, saying, hey, I've been doing this for 30 years, why would I do this course? I can train your people how to do it. Just say, hey, put you've got 500 people doing excavations, or 50 people, just put one person on the course, give us some feedback. And when they come back, inevitably it's, oh wow, we did learn something on that course and it was quite good. Or if they've used another provider in the past, we'll get feedback saying, well, that was like not comparing apples to apples. That was a fantastic course in comparison to what we've had before. And I think the reason is, as a supplier of the equipment, we have a lot of kit. We have a lorry load full of kit, basically, excavation equipment that we use on the course. And we're able to bring lots of systems into play, the in-house designs that we do, all that kind of knowledge. So we're able to, install, inspect those systems, pull them out the ground, fill the hole back in, put another system in. There's no sort of fake, false environments like concrete pits or anything like that. This is real, nasty, muddy boots out in the rain, doing the job as it would be done on a site. So I think that's good for us, Phil, because it means that people can actually get a good quality course off the back of it, because they've learned it from beginning to end.
And I mean, the technology, it obviously evolves fairly rapidly in this day and age. So I'm just wondering as well how you keep abreast of that. And you're looking at developing new ways of delivering courses, or adding extra bits, or just how you manage to make sure that you're delivering the latest technology to folks.
Yeah, I know this sounds a bit strange, Phil, but the technology side of things is sort of surrounding the training, meaning, within our design teams, we have things like BIM, it's a big BIM modeling. We have people now wanting 3D modeling. All of these things are coming in. That's there on the outside, but the people that are actually installing, inspecting these systems and removing them, they're at the coalface, if you will. So they're actually, the technology is not as, apparent to them or important to them. They're wanting to go back to basics in reality. So we're kind of bucking the trend of technology in the training, because that's what people want. They actually want to get as quickly as possible out of that classroom onto actually practical applications. Whereas outside of that environment, in the ground force shore coast side of things, we embracing the technology, investing, because that's what, when it comes to designing and engineering, that's a must. But when it comes to the installation, it's back to basics again. How do I keep myself safe on this site? How do I know when to check the excavation? There's been rain overnight. How do I know it's still safe? Have things moved? All of those things is what the people on the ground are looking for. So I know, sort of dodging the question, but that is the reality of where we are. And I think that people appreciate that honesty, that we're not trying to go digital with our training, because it just doesn't make any sense. I actually want to go old school and go like, let's go back to basics here, while still having something that's accredited and industry recognized and follows standards. So we have, in our business, we have a gentleman named Mark Ibbotson. He's our training compliance manager. And what he does is keep us in check. So he makes sure that we're updating the standards, we're updating the courses, that if new things come into play, we're adding them into the courses. We're making that investment. All of our people are directly employed instructors, which is something that's virtually unheard of in the training industry, which is full of brokers, if you will, full of independents. So we've kind of gone with a very, very high cost base, high quality, as opposed to, bringing people in that might not have the expertise and trying to train them up.
And in terms of, I think you alluded to it earlier, but I'm just intrigued in terms of the dialogue between yourselves and the contractors, or I guess your bread and butter sort of clients, customers. So
Yeah.
presumably it's a bit of a two-way process. Obviously, you are experts at what you're doing, but you will also, when contractors give you feedback as to, I don't know, any very unusual conditions they've come across and would like you to address or whatever. So just thoughts as to how you work with contractors to make sure that the courses are exactly as required.
Yeah, I think it's just back to listening to the contractor. When they're, like I said earlier, they want a bespoke course sometimes. They don't really understand what that means. We're able to go through, talk about it, and they typically will find that 95% of that is contained in the course anyway. So we have people like Clancy Dockra, for example, that wants maybe a lightweight shoring course, for example. They don't want all the heavy bracing, the sheet piles. So we'll create a course for them. Well, we had recently about 3 years ago, we had Gearren on the Angling and Water contract that identified that coil trailers that go out on utility sites were very, very dangerous and wanted us to develop a course that didn't exist. So we went out, developed a course, and got it accredited with EUSR, EU Skills, so that it was industry recognized. And interestingly enough, this year we've had, or the industry's had, a fatality on a site around a coil trailer. So from that, we already had a course developed. So that's exploded for us. So it's more listening, as a client, what do you need? We have a MACE group, for example, is one of them that's doing locate utility services, and they're doing appreciation of excavation safety, but they don't always carry out the work because they're the tier 1 contractor, but they need to understand the risks involved. They need to understand it fully, and they want to bring some of their procedures in. So it's just some examples where we would bespoke something for the client, roll it out within their systems, and then try to ensure we work with them to make that part of their safety culture going forward.
Okay, and I guess the other sort of important, I call them stakeholders or whatever, but you've got sort of industry bodies and then accreditation bodies, the safety place. So I presume you have a close, you mentioned, I think, an example there where you say the coil trailers, and lo and behold, you had a course, it's got accredited. So is that what you basically do whenever you develop a new course? You work with the appropriate people to get it accredited, etc. And do you get any pushback from them, or do they come to you, knock on the door and say, hey, a couple of people have contacted us about this, would you like to create a course? Just again, the sort of interaction between yourselves and those bodies.
Yeah, if I'm honest, Phil, I think, because of who we are, one of the top shoring, if not the top shoring supplier in the UK, a hire business, we started out with the excavation side of life. So the install, inspect, and remove of the timber, steel, and proprietary shoring systems effectively. And from there, then we've listened to the clients who said, great, Chris, that was a wonderful course, and we've put 100 people through it and we love it. What about asbestos awareness, or what about manual handling, and what about, abrasive wheels, or whatever it might be, petrol cutoff saws? And like the clients have said, we can get those courses in the marketplace, but fundamentally, a lot of them don't have an accreditation, or they don't have an accreditation that we want to map to EU Skills or whatever it might be. So we'll listen to that and say, right, so if we develop that course and get the standards right and get the assessments right, and maybe be one of the first people in the industry that rolls this course out, would you support us by booking a few of those courses? And that's how we've grown over the years. Whereas our clients come to us and said, yeah, if you could do that painful work, we will then book those courses with you as a starter. And that's how it's worked. And we've then rolled that out to several other clients and sort of become attractive on dozens and dozens and dozens of courses now away from the excavation. But we're always trying to keep that core excavation side of life, where we normally speak to a client and inevitably someone that's hiring out our systems to say, hey, did you know that we have an actual training business, and it's, we can ensure that you're safe when you install, inspect, and remove the systems. And sometimes they'll say, you know what, That's great. I'm not really my mindset. I'm not ready to do that yet. We think we can do it ourselves. However, I've got this training requirement. Can you help me out with that? So we've listened to those needs and grown from there.
Okay, and in terms of the customers looking at aware that they maybe need to do more when it comes to excavation safety, have you got any, I suppose, advice for them? And also, I guess if they've got to the stage where I think, yes, we do need to go and find some, training to get us, again, are there any do's and don'ts? Are there any sort of alarm bells if you have a dialogue with a certain company and they're not doing this or they're doing it? Just sort of thoughts as to how, how to assess potential, training partners, if you like.
I always start with competency. So we talked about that earlier. A lot of people think they're fully competent to do the type of work that they're doing. So from a company level, from an individual level, if that training is removed and that there is no training whatsoever, because I've been doing this for 30 years, then you cannot be competent. It's impossible, because a circle of competency, and training is part of it. Attitude, supervision, there's lots that go into competency, but training is part of that. So we just say, we don't want to be disrespectful to the people that aren't doing it. There hasn't been availability in the marketplace in the past. They fully believe they know what they're doing. But eventually, like I said earlier, when you look at one of the most dangerous jobs you can possibly do on a site, it potentially is going to be excavations. And for some reason, historically, tier one contractors have largely ignored that side of life for some reason. And whether that is because there might be a design in place or there's a temporary works coordinator signing off on some of this work. The ground workers themselves have never been qualified. So we're just trying to talk to people to say, look, did you know you don't have to not be trained anymore? You can actually get qualified. It's quite easy. There's lots of locations. Here's a bona fide proven course here that the industry loves. And could you just have a think about it? It's down to mindset, having a look at it. Would you ever potentially think about getting some of your people trained on this temporary works project or on these systems? Because we all talk about safety, it's the right thing to do. But then when you walk on a site and see probably the most dangerous thing on the site happening and no one's trained, it was quite strange to me. Because there's lots of other things that are mandatory that are much, much lower risk. But it's like mandated. Everyone has to be trained on those things. And when you come to the excavation side, there's very rarely a mandate that this needs to be done.
I mean, yeah, is that something that you campaigned for, or you clearly, as you've outlined, is a very important aspect? And as you say, from the minute you arrive at site, there's someone normally on the gate checking you in that you've got the high-vis jacket and the boots and the hat. But as you say, if you're then allowed let loose, if you like, in an excavation hole, and you've got no real so is that something you think it's important at some stage the construction industry needs to address and put something in place to make it some level of competency compulsory? Would you think that's long overdue?
Yeah, I mean, clearly it's way overdue. When you dig into the HSE stats of fatalities on sites, I mean, it's very hard to dig into the actual detail, because the detail isn't there. But you get headings like work at height, fatalities, or crushing, all of these things, crushing and work at height fatalities, roll up into an excavation. So I think we believe, because we've got some protection measures in place, such as the shoring that's behind me here, that we're fully safe. It just isn't true. So we need to keep campaigning, talking about it, being positive about the fact that it's not okay to hire out this equipment without any training whatsoever. But that's not for me to say. That is down to the construction industry to have a look at it, the utilities industry. And we've made some huge headways. We're very, very busy. We got lots of directly employed instructors out there delivering these courses every single day. So it's building upon that. And I'm hoping the next 10 years, we'll be in a much better place. Another 20 years will be in a better place, and so forth.
Yeah, funny enough, I mean, as we finish, I was going to ask, you mentioned the future, in terms of how you see the future developing, are you sort of positive that the message is getting through and therefore at some stage you will achieve sort of sufficient momentum? I mean, it sounds obviously you're busy anyway, but you'll get the momentum there, and the topic you're talking about will, or the top, the various topics will gain the respect they deserve. Just your thoughts as to the future, or is part of you slightly nervous that whether it's because of the cost of living crisis and there's not enough money to go around, therefore we won't send those guys on that training course or whatever? Just your thoughts as to how you hope, shall we say, that the future looks for what you're doing.
No, I think it's very, very bright. I'm very encouraged by the investment that, say, 20% of the clients that hire the equipment from us have made huge investments into ensuring their people are trained to install, inspect, and remove the systems. And if I say 80% haven't, then that's a huge opportunity for us to continue to talk about it, to raise the awareness. And I think peer pressure as well, people tendering for contracts, and, they're going up against a contractor that has, say, trained 100 people on this, and they can show it, prove it, then that peer pressure is really, really good, because it raises the standards, and we're witnessing people winning contracts and winning work based on, not just the lowest price, but also having invested in things that might not be mandatory, which shows above and beyond, hey, Mr. Client, Anglian Water, whoever it might be, I'm coming at this level, and yet they're going to be tenders down at this lower level without that training, without making that investment at the lowest price. But that's not the type of company we are. So I think that is very, very good for us. There's word of mouth, lots of referrals, people coming back over and over and over again onto our training courses. So I feel like we just got started, if I'm honest. There's a lot to do. A lot more potential. We could easily double the size of the business in the next 10 years, easily. So I think it's a really bright future. Customers and clients are making heavy investments into the training, and that's absolutely fantastic. They see the quality, they see how much it takes to put one of these courses on and what's involved, and they recognize that. And it's very, very rare that we get individuals trying to say, I want 50% off this course or whatever it might be. We're not really in that marketplace. We're in more of a specialist marketplace, and people appreciate what we do and bringing that locally as well. So I think there's huge potential in the next few years, Phil.
And then just quickly, in terms of the responsibility, I mean, the contractors potentially get it as well, but are they also maybe getting pushback from, whether it's the water companies or whatever, are those increasingly interested? Because I say, if someone has a, God forbid, a fatality or a serious accident, clearly the ramifications are huge for many of the people involved. So is there the whole I suppose all the different stakeholders beginning to become more aware of the importance, or at least aware that if they don't have it and then something goes wrong, they're in a really bad position? So is that driving the industry forward as well?
Well, it can, which is disappointing, if I'm honest, because when we see a fatality like we've seen recently, we get a huge, gigantic spike, as you can imagine, in inquiries to us, pressure for us to get out to site ASAP and deliver this big raft of courses, which in one way that's great. It's revenue. It's, that's great. But then inevitably that would die a death potentially. And then the next round of people don't get that training because there hasn't been a fatality. So what we need to do, instead of that fading away into the night, effectively, we need to keep that on the agenda to say, look, this has happened, and we need to keep refreshing the training and make sure we keep doing it so that we don't get into that situation. Because, worst thing for a training company like myself would go scaremongering. It's not about that. It's about getting ahead of the situation. So if you're looking at your risk and you see that excavations or whatever it might be is quite a high risk activity, then I would question Well, so there's no training on a very high risk activity, which just seems very, very strange. And inevitably, if you dig deeper into that, you'll find out the tier one contractor hasn't mandated it. So therefore the money hasn't been spent, which is, we need to flip it on its head really and kind of look and say, well, let's get ahead of this. This is a potential risky job, regardless of the protection systems. You know, let's invest now before something happens.
Okay, we covered a lot of ground, and I think you very kindly answered, in great detail the questions. Chris, really appreciate spending the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me.